So let's get this show started. Mike.
It is my pleasure to see all of you. And I feel privileged to be able to do this in a pandemic time. And I appreciate all the effort that goes into setting this up. I want to talk about a way of thinking and a way of working that helps your organization, your team, or you personally navigate unpredictable territory and achieve challenging goals if you practice it. It does take a little bit of practice. It's also a way of thinking that helps you have a life that has excitement, discovery, and satisfaction in it. And I like the sentence on this slide here: enjoy discovering the world beyond your perception of it. I think as a young person, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed that sentence so much. I think the world as I perceived it was it. But I now very much enjoy that sentence. And I'd like to talk about basically the thinking about behind that sentence. Maybe I'm going to start a little bit on a downer here. We're stuck on this planet and we're stuck here forever. It gets even a little bit worse. We are limited to the surface of this planet. That is, we can't live underground, not for any length of time. And we can't live more than about 5,000 meters up. We can't survive up higher than that. If you calculate that real quick, those 5,000 meters, that's about 55 football fields thick. All of us are going to be spending our lives in an extremely thin layer on this planet. So we talk about colonizing other planets, maybe living on Mars, or maybe even just jetpacks so we can zoom around, up there. Probably not going to happen. You could prove me wrong, but it's probably not going to happen. Now, if that weren't enough of a constraint on us, we're also stuck with a biased jump to conclusions brain. The point here is we don't see reality, we see our brain's interpretation of reality. And by the way, you have an engineer here talking about the brain, so please take it with a grain of salt. But what happens is our brain is not connected to the outside world by some kind of tubes that view the outside world. Our brain is connected to the outside world by wires. And the brain receives electrical signals over these neurons and has to interpret what they mean. So when we look at something, there are these signals coming in, and the brain has to somehow figure out what is it that this is telling me. And that doesn't always work very well. As you can see in this picture, the brain gets some signals, but that's not actually what's going on. The brain interprets these signals to tell us what is going on out there. The brain does this by jumping to conclusions based on our library of experiences. So the brain is constantly jumping to conclusions. We never have full information, but we need to know quickly. As you navigate, as you drive, as you walk around, as you have a conversation, whatever's going on, you kind of have to know quickly what's happening. So the brain takes the inputs it's getting, these dots and dashes, these are little electrical signals, and quickly decides what's happening and gives you a sense that you know what's happening. And as it's noted here in the slide, the brain does that quickly and it does it silently. It doesn't tell you that it doesn't have full information. It just tells you, here's what's going on, and you have a feeling of certainty about it. The brain doesn't say, I think what's going on out there is this, but why don't you hold on for a minute and we'll gather more data and we'll figure it out. And the way that works is it gets those electrical signals and it compares them to a neural library that you've built up over your lifetime. That is, the particular neural library you built up from your childhood drives how you perceive and react to the world. So it takes those signals, compares it to what's in the library, then tells you what's going on. Now, this works really well. Most of the time it's working fine. Again, constantly jumping to conclusions. I used to think jumping to conclusions is something that only happens once in a while, but actually it's constantly interpreting those signals and jumping to a conclusion of what those signals are. So for example, you see a coffee cup, not bad, it's a coffee cup. There may be more to it, there may be something in the coffee cup may be hot, but by and large, our conclusion system, our interpretation of the signals works pretty well. It's just that at times, it doesn't work so well. So we don't know what's at the end of this road. We don't know what's going to happen next. There are many, many things we take input on, but we don't have full information. As a result, at all times, all of the following are potentially biased and unreliable. our assumptions, our opinions, our perceptions, our memory, our perspective. I'm sorry, guys, I probably should have told you this was going to be a short and kind of depressing presentation. So that's it. That's the end of my presentation. Basically, the message is we're tapping around in the dark with a sensory system that distorts. Sorry, kind of a downer way to start the day. But wait, there's a little bit more. You know, I talked about an interesting, exciting, satisfying life through scientific thinking. Here's the point I would like to make following that. There's an infinite number of things for us to discover right here in that thin layer that we're living in. Can occupy us for the rest of our lives. And a key to a meaningful life is to get good at the process of discovering the reality behind your current perceptions. I'm talking about your success as a group, as an organization, as a team, as an individual. I kind of like the team level. I think a lot of interesting things happen at the team level. And the word surprise comes to mind here. And that's not typically a positive word in the business world, but I think it's an important aspect of adaptiveness and resilience, that we experience surprise and we utilize surprise to our advantage. With practice, it even becomes kind of fun. And that, in a nutshell, is what Toyota Kata is about. The Toyota Kata research was driven by two questions. I'll just read them quickly. First question is, what are the unseen managerial routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success with continuous improvement and adaptation? We knew something was missing in our understanding of what Toyota is doing. We also knew it had to be somehow in their managerial system, and that is somewhat invisible. We talk about scientific thinking at this conference. Notice that thinking is invisible. I should also mention as a sidebar, someone mentioned earlier, I think, Joachim, you mentioned that yesterday we talked about scientific thinking is at the core of lean. I'm not entirely comfortable with statements like that, only because I've learned that there's always another layer. And I look forward to learning what the other layers are that we are still missing. And I know that probably someone who's watching this will discover those layers. The second question then, if you get the first question, if you can get some understanding of, okay, what are they doing in their management system? What are the kind of routines and thinking that lie behind that? Then the next question almost offers itself up. How can other organizations, how can other teams, how can they develop similar routines and similar thinking in their organizations? And that's actually the more interesting question to me. And I think that is the one that occupies me more than anything these days. Some of you might ask, by the way, why Toyota? And I understand, talking about Toyota all the time, not everybody wants to do that. McGraw-Hill, when they published the Toyota Kata book, they had a lot of success with Jeff Liker's Toyota series. So they named the book Toyota Kata. I'm actually happy with the name. But also yesterday, Malik pointed out that they had to rename it Sarajevo Kata. And I think that's just fine. The only thing I caution with adaptation of Toyota Kata is just try it as is first. Any kata out there, you practice it a little bit as designed first. And then once you get a little bit of experience with it, you can adapt it to your context. But why did we follow Toyota? Real quickly, it's an interesting research subject. I think this is also, what attracted Jeff Liker, John Shook, and other colleagues. Number one, profitable for 60 years, except for 1 year. That's an astonishing track record. But number two, they keep improving. And they have the ability somehow to stay inventive and adaptive and continually improving, even though they're a mature company. And that's a combination you don't find very often. You normally hear about the life cycle of a company. They become a mature company and they become kind of set in their ways and they have their cash cow products and that's it. Toyota has somehow so far avoided that fate. That's what attracted us to Toyota. That's what made us ask these questions. 3 phases of the research. The first phase, of course, study how Toyota managers operate and think. It's not as easy as you might think to do that because, as I mentioned, thinking is invisible. You can go to Toyota and see all these visible things. Also, a lot of them speak Japanese, and they also refuse to let me sit in on meetings, which is something I used to love to do as a researcher. But Toyota said, no, you cannot sit in on our meetings. So it took a while to figure that out. Going down one layer, we described that with 2 models. And that's just classic research work. The arrow between studying how they behave and describing that with models should probably go back and forth. You start sketching out your models, then you go back and you compare them to what's really going on. That goes back and forth for a while until the models kind of stabilize, they stop oscillating. The first two layers are pretty standard research. But the third layer, we developed starter kata practice routines to help others develop similar skills and thinking. That third layer is a little bit different, and that's born out of the realization about how we humans develop skills and habits. And I'd like to talk more about that in a moment. So those are kind of the three layers of the Toyota Kata research, with the third layer being somewhat unique in terms of how research is normally done. Typically, you get to that second layer, you've got your models, you've got your conclusions, you write your papers and books, but that isn't quite enough. All right, so question one, what are these unseen managerial routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success? Here's basically what we found, and it's summarized in the 2009 Toyota Kata book. There's visible stuff, Toyota's results, the lean tools and techniques, but we found this less visible stuff, and just 2 points about that. Number one, a systematic scientific way of thinking and acting, a practical everyday form of scientific thinking. And number two, managers as the teachers or coaches who teach their people of thinking this way. And it's important that the managers are the teachers and the coaches, because a systematic scientific way of thinking and acting, it's not natural to us. It's not very difficult, but it's not natural to us humans. So you actually need to you make a conscious effort to teach it and practice it in your team. There has to be some kind of conscious effort to practice and teach this, because it's not our normal way as humans. Notice also that what's at the top of this diagram is Toyota specific. Toyota has certain results, Toyota has certain tools, Toyota has visible things that we've seen. I think the lean world kind of came in through that upper bar. But notice that the bottom part here is not Toyota specific. It actually is talking more about humans, not about Toyota in particular. And it actually is something that can be used in any context. And I think that's the doorway that led to everything that's happened with Toyota Kata since the book came out in 2009. The fact that the bottom part is a human question, not a Toyota question. All right, so real quick, these findings led to two models. George Box said all models are wrong, some are useful. This is our best effort to describe routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success. I won't go through them, but there's the improvement kata model. Most of you know that, but there's also a coaching kata model. Each manager at Toyota that we kind of shadowed and tried to understand, each one has their own style. But if you look long enough, they tend to think and act this way. If you lean back a little bit and look at these models, that's when you go, oh, these are scientific thinking patterns. All right, well, this does raise the question, what do we mean by scientific thinking? Number one, acknowledging that our comprehension is always incomplete and possibly wrong. We never have the full story. Number two, assuming that we're going to find answers by trying things, not necessarily by sitting and talking. It's really fun to get donuts and coffee, at least it was pre-pandemic, to get donuts and coffee and sit around and talk about, what might be coming, but that's not how we find answers. We try things. And the third one, and this is the tough one, appreciating that differences between what we thought and what actually happens can be a useful source of learning and adjusting. Imagine for a moment if everyone thought like this. Imagine if everyone on the planet had this mindset. Imagine what we could achieve. This is the kind of thinking that we found Toyota tries to develop in its people. They want their people solving problems and pursuing challenging goals with a scientific mindset. And we talked yesterday a little bit about how to a manager, the idea of experimenting sounds slow. It's interesting to observe that Toyota may be slow at the beginning of an effort, but then in the total effort, they are usually faster. So there's something about this scientific mindset and scientific way of working that's actually quite efficient, even though it may not appear so at the beginning. And again, as you can see, nothing on this slide is Toyota specific. Because of the way our brain works, because of our useful but problematic jump to conclusions mechanism. This kind of thinking is useful everywhere. What's different about a scientific thinker? Here's just a quick attempt to try to explain that. As children, we think our beliefs are mental copies of reality. What we see is what it is. It's a little bit like if I close my eyes, you can't see me. Remember that? As adults, of course, we realize that our mental representations, what we think, don't necessarily duplicate what's going on out there, that we have a perspective. We recognize that. But I think scientific thinkers go one step further. It's like an extra little bit. They not only realize that our brains' ideas are not necessarily congruent with external reality, they also compare the two. They utilize that difference in order to learn, and they utilize it to their advantage. Now, I picked a picture here of a scientist who's smiling, but I have to say, scientific thinkers are not immune to fear. If you give a scientific thinker a difficult challenge, they're not going to go, hallelujah, I was waiting for the next difficult challenge. They're going to feel the same feeling in the pit of their stomach, the same fear in the pit of their stomach that you and I feel when something unknown is given to us as a challenge. But they quickly say, okay, I've navigated this kind of thing before. I think I know how to do it. I think we can get through this. Or scientists are not immune to feeling disappointment when what they thought doesn't come true, when their hypothesis is refuted, or when, Nigel, as you said, their assumptions are refuted. They will feel disappointment, but they check that. They check their bias pretty quickly and say, okay, what can I learn from this? And I think that's what distinguishes a scientific thinker from perhaps every other adult. And again, I invite you to think about, what if everyone thought this way? Imagine the things we can achieve. So this is navigating with a compass instead of a map. If you've got a map, great, but they're not really that available, particularly, I think, in the times we find ourselves in now. So scientific thinking could well be the best way we have for navigating through complex, dynamic, unpredictable territory. And I added here, which equals life. And that means I'm not just talking to a business audience. And I'll come back to that again in a little bit too. This is something we can all use not only in the business world, in our work world, but in our personal lives as well. There's kind of a trap. I come from an engineering department, and there's kind of an engineering trap. We have a lot of knowledge. There's all sorts of knowledge. People have gone before us to learn and codify this knowledge that we can use. However, there's no guarantee that past experiences will be consistent with future situations. So we can take that knowledge that's already been accumulated, but as we apply it in a new situation, we still have to keep an open mind to what might happen, to differences from our expectations that we can use to quickly adapt and adjust and be resilient. So it's a bit of a trick. I think Jeff Leiker talked yesterday about the dichotomy, mechanistic versus organic, and that you kind of have to have both in your head at the same time. Let's use the knowledge we've accumulated. Let's use the speeds and feeds tables we have as machinists and so forth, of course. But let's also have that mind open for things to go differently than we expect. So scientific thinking is a meta skill. All that means is that it's content neutral. I think Beth Carrington coined that phrase. It's content free, it's content neutral. What a wonderful thing to practice and learn, because we don't know what's coming in the future. So we're not teaching today's solutions. We're teaching a way of developing solutions as we go forward. So it's a wonderful thing to practice. And let me add, it's a wonderful thing to teach to young people. This is a great subject for K through 12 education and even smaller children. So basically, what you learn from one step may influence what you do in the next step. You make a prediction, reality happens. If there's a difference, you learn from it and adjust. A way I like to think about it is, we can't see reality out there. We're tapping around in the dark. We're getting these little electrical signals. So what the scientific thinker does is he or she pokes reality. And that forces reality to reveal itself a little bit to us. We can see how reality reacts. That tells us something about the reality out there, and we can utilize that information. Scientific thinking compensates for our blindness. So as you go forward, your threshold of knowledge moves. You're essentially reassessing at each landing zone. And of course, I should add, your goals may evolve too. That's why you're not setting all your target conditions at once. So research question number 2, how can other companies develop similar routines in thinking? how do you develop that useful thinking that's not our default mode? Unfortunately, we have something that people, I think BJ Fogg calls it the information action fallacy. It's a common, well-meaning mistake. It's the idea that we provide this information, we write a book, we explain something, and that will change behavior. Unfortunately, that is not how it works. That doesn't change the brain. It takes deliberate practice. And again, I'd like to reiterate that I think the scientific thinking stuff is not all that difficult, but it's not our normal mode, and that's what makes it a habit change effort. Here are a few ingredients. I won't go through all of them. These are the things that you find a Toyota manager working with as they coach their team to develop scientific thinking. Now, each manager has their own starter kata. Toyota Kata provides a set of starter kata for you. Practice routines. This is the third layer of the research. So we developed starter kata based on the idea that just explaining something is not going to work. That was the 2018 book, Toyota Kata Practice Guide. These starter kata are not from Toyota. And I probably should have explained that better. I still get people coming back and I've never seen these starter kata at Toyota. Of course you haven't. I didn't see those models at Toyota either. Of course you haven't. Those are a researcher's models. And these are starter kata for people who don't have seasoned coaches like they do at Toyota. The starter kata are a mechanism to make the Toyota Kata findings transferable. That's the idea. This is the best depiction I've ever found of starter kata. It's from actually an educator. Notice on the left-hand side of the pool, the coach is having everyone practice a kick, and they're all doing the same exact thing. Can't you just hear one of those swimmers going, I don't want to practice my kick. I want to swim. You will soon enough, but you have to practice these fundamentals. This is the same in music. This is the same in sports. To the right-hand side of the pool, now the individuals can perform situationally in various contexts in their own style. So the starter kata are just something you practice at the beginning. And the starter kata that Toyota Kata offers are purely an assist. They catch you, they hold you a little bit at the beginning, and then you can develop your own way. And frankly, companies will develop their own starter kata or variations of the starter kata. One of the starter kata is an experimenting record. Do it exactly as designed for a while, and then adjust it to suit your context. What's important about the starter kata drills is the thinking skills that practicing leaves behind. The kata themselves are just a booster rocket at the beginning. You don't practice them all at once at the beginning. You practice them kind of one at a time. You master these pieces, right? And then over time, you learn to put the pieces together. If you get skillful, you can recombine how you use these depending on the context or situation. That's when you know you're starting to get a skill. Basically, what we're doing here is growing scientific response habits. This happens, how does the person react? This context, this situation, how does the person react? You guys recognize this triad here. It's pretty common right now. It's in the literature a lot. There's some kind of trigger, so we have a daily coaching cycle. Then there's a behavior that gets practiced, and that could be one of the starter kata. You can just write in which one it is. And then there's a result, hopefully a positive feedback, and the cycle goes on. What you're getting to is that you might step in at any point. So the improvement kata model starts with, well, what's the direction or challenge? But life doesn't always start with that. Then the second step is grasp the current condition. But life doesn't always have that as the second step. And so what we're trying to do is create scientific thinkers. This person walks into a situation, and because they've practiced these 7 starter kata, they might say, oh, well, that goal is not very good that you're striving for. So let's adjust that target condition. They might come in through that doorway and begin. Eventually, you'll use all the routines, but you come in through different doors. The capability to walk into a situation and respond scientifically, no matter what's going on, that's what we're trying to build. And at that point, the model is no longer there. It's in your head. It's in your gut. The patterns of the model and the patterns of the starter kata are in you, but you apply them in the context situationally. This is a spot where a lot of people get stuck. Does practicing something new feel awkward? Of course it does. You know, you practice something new and you feel all these feelings that are listed here, and so you go back to the way you did it before. You stop. Just let me do what I did before. It's more comfortable. It's basically taking you very much out of your comfort zone, and that's completely normal. This is something for coaches. You know, this is a good sign. This feeling of struggle, it means you're starting to build new neural paths. It means your brain's trying to use neural pathways that it's never really used before or hardly has used before. If it feels uncomfortable because you haven't done that before, keep going. It's a good sign. What I want to say is your workplace is an excellent place to practice. Maybe not as good during COVID, but let's assume COVID will end eventually. The thing is, you have to practice daily and you need coaches and you need to work on something real. Those are some of the ingredients of good practice. So at work, there are real goals and problems to work on, not fake ones, not simulations. We're not building Lego things or paper airplanes. These are real, meaningful issues. And that's important. It has to be meaningful when you're practicing. Number two, there are people to coach one another. And they're there every day. And you're there every day. So the workplace is an excellent place to practice scientific thinking a la Toyota Kata. And here's the cool thing. This is what happens. This is a recent tweet. Today, a team member brought in a container from home to try out in a process. I asked that team member if he was thinking in the improvement kata steps, i.e. scientifically, outside of work. His answer, I am thinking like this everywhere. This is what excites me. The workplace is possibly one of the best places to practice for the reasons I gave, but the skills learned carry through 24 hours a day. We're creating scientific thinkers, not just at work, we're creating scientific thinkers in society. My suggestion is make your workplace a force for positive change. Turn your workplace into a forum for practicing practical, everyday scientific thinking, and that spills over into society. And actually, I'm preaching to the choir here. I think, as I mentioned yesterday, that Toyota Kata has reached this level, that we're no longer talking about a business solution. We're no longer talking about a lean thing. I think Toyota Kata, thanks to you and everyone else, the Toyota Kata community out there, the growing Toyota Kata community out there, this is happening. And maybe it's because, unlike lean, which seems somewhat defined and baked, Toyota Kata is so new that there's room for interpretations, there's room for new experiences. Wow, what a pleasure to enjoy discovering the world beyond our perceptions of it. And even though we're stuck in the thin layer, what a wonderful place to be stuck, what a wonderful array of things to discover. My best wishes for your practice and your coaching. When you start, you're the person on top. You're the learner, exploring, discovering, developing your scientific thinking skills. But after you do that, please become the person on the bottom and coach someone else in it. And you'll learn even more. The coaches, I think teachers, coaches learn the most.